Okay, so you want to use specific exercises to start to correct your scoliosis. Once people take control of their spines, they tell me that their lives change in some unexpected ways. My clients have more endurance to do simple things like hiking and gardening without pain. But recently, someone I was working with told me that their headaches and jaw pain cleared up, which is not what she expected from doing these simple exercises at home. But to me, it all makes sense because the body is interconnected. Now, with that in mind, I want to use this video to show you how the scoliosis mobility to stability formula doesn't have to be hard, complicated, or even a painful process. I want to show you how you don't need to waste time driving to specialist clinics, finding parking, dealing with all the wait lists, the new hygiene, the bookings, and all that kind of stuff. I want to show you that all you need is a screen, the ability to watch videos just like you are now, and how you can get started with this in less than 5 minutes at home. Now, in the last video, I explained why the current medical model of wait and see, also known as monitoring the curve, surgery and painkillers aren't doing anything to slow down, stop, or even reverse the progression of scoliosis. Also, it isn't helping you become stronger or more mobile, and it certainly isn't educating you about your spine, which is what you need. Now, I explained to you how the specific exercises for the scoliosis in the scoliosis mobility to stability formula can help you decrease your pain so that you can work for longer, play harder, and enjoy life more. I explained to you how they can potentially change the way you look so that you can stand taller and have less of a rib hump. In case you haven't watched the first video yet, make sure you do that at the end of this because I covered a lot of important information, and if you're serious about controlling your curve, you don't want to miss out. Okay, to me, the most obvious place to start isn't actually with scoliosis exercises. It's with knowing what type of scoliosis you have. You might already know what type of scoliosis you have. You may have had x-rays, and that's fantastic, but I want to show you something on an x-ray that can stop you from making a massive mistake. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Now, maybe you've had an x-ray years ago, but you don't have it anymore. So I want to show you a test that you can do at home which will help remind you of the curve you have. Or maybe you had an x-ray, but you didn't get the actual screens, you get a report, which is written in a medical language that only doctors understand. So I'm going to translate that for you, and that will help you identify the curve you have. So enough looking at me, let's jump over to some x-rays and I will show you exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, understanding what type of scoliosis you have. Okay, so what curves can the mobility to stability formula help with? Well, they can help with a C curve, which is also called a lavoscoliosis, a reverse C curve, dextroscoliosis, an S curve and a reverse S curve. So the reverse S curve is the most common curve. About 80% of people will have that. So you probably have a reverse S curve, especially if you had it as when you were a teenager. So one of those idiopathic curves. Now, if your curve came on when you were slightly older, in adulthood, then you may well have a C curve, usually in the lumbar area. Okay, so what's the best way to tell what type of scoliosis you have? It's an X-ray. Now, if there's any doubt, then that's usually the best thing to do. So if in doubt, get an x-ray, because x-rays show things like this. So on the left here, we have a hemivertebra, which is something that you're born with. Then we have this failure of segmentation, which is where the actual vertebrae have not kind of grown properly. And so these things can cause a scoliosis, but they can't be corrected with exercise. So if you have never had an x-ray, and you've had a scoliosis your whole life, it's worth getting one just to find out whether or not you have one of these things. This would be called a congenital scoliosis, and the exercises in the mobility to stability formula won't help you as well as they could if you didn't have one of these things. Having said that, they could actually help the curves above and below these fixed areas. All right, so I just wanted to show you what this looks like. So this is a hemivertebra on an x-ray. So it's quite important to be able to see that and to actually know what you're dealing with. Right, what type of x-rays should you get? You should get a standing x-ray, which is called AP, which is anterior to posterior, and a lateral projection, which is down to the side. If you wear a brace, you should do it without the brace. You should also see if it can include both hip joints, the whole pelvis and obviously the whole spine, and even the lower half of the skull and shoulder girdle, because this allows the radiologist, the person who actually reads the x-ray, to look for other structural or developmental abnormalities that could be causing your scoliosis as well. So when to take an X-ray? Now, if your child has got a scoliosis and they're still growing and their degrees are greater than 30, you should be taking X-rays about 4 times a year. If the curve is less than 30 and has not progressed, then X-rays can be taken once a year. And that's because the higher the curve, so over 30 degrees, means that it's more likely to progress. And what I'm talking about here when I'm talking about degrees is a thing called a Cobb angle, and that's usually measured on an X-ray. Now in adults, because you stop growing, the X-ray can be taken once every 4 years, unless you think sort of rapid change is basically suspected. So if you think it's growing and someone says it's growing, then maybe you can go a little bit quicker with every 4 years, but generally every 4 years just to keep an eye on it. Now there's something that you should know about children and the X-rays. It's called the Risser Sign. So basically when the skeleton matures, they grade it out of 0 to 5, 5 being a fully mature skeleton and 0 being not fully mature. And what you want to do is have a high Risser sign and a low angle of curve. That means you want a fully mature skeleton and a curve below 30, because that makes a very predictable curve. But if you have a low Risser sign, so something like 2 or 3, and a high angle of the curve at a young age, then there is an increased chance of rapid progression, which means that you need to monitor it very carefully and also do lots and lots of exercises. Okay. But what, let's say you don't have an X-ray, or you've had an X-ray but you want to double check. How do you do this stuff at home? So we call it the Adams test. So the Adams test is actually super simple. And then we use a tool called the Scolimeter. And these are great to detect the 4 main curves. So those C curves and those S curves. So the mechanics of the Adams test are pretty straightforward. You're sort of like this diagram here. You're looking from behind at yourself. You either do that with a camera, you can use a video camera, you can set up your smartphone from behind as you bend forward. Or you get someone else to do this for you, and you get them to watch this video to learn how to do it. So the trick is you've got to make sure the knees are both straight, because if there's a bent knee, it will also affect the pelvis, which will affect the spine. So make sure your knees are straight, and all you need to do is literally bend forward. Not like a yoga bending forward where you go from the hips. This is a top down, each vertebra over vertebra going into flexion. And what it does is actually it brings out any rib humps, because when you bend forward, it actually exaggerates all the other movements of the spine, because the movements in the spine are coupled. So let's look at this. This is sort of basically how it looks. This is someone with a scoliosis on the right hand side bending forward, and you'll see a rib hump on the right. On the left-hand side there, it's a normal spine, it's no rib hump. So when you crouch behind someone, you should be able to see this. All right, so let's have a look at one of these curves here. So this is a reverse C-shape curve, or what we can call a dextroscoliosis. So do you remember what I was talking about earlier? You may have a piece of paper from the doctor that has this medical language on. Dextro means right. And so the apex of the curve, which is always how we measure these things, is on the right-hand side. You can see it there, it's a reverse C-shape. And so as this person bends forward, there will also be a rib hump on the right-hand side. And the reason for that is, again, the coupling. They always couple. So if it's bent or the apex is on the right, you'll have a rib hump on the right. So what does this look like on X-ray? Well, this is a reverse C-shape. So you can see in this picture here, it doesn't look like a reverse C-shape, it looks like a normal C-shape, and that's because we're looking at it from the front. There's the heart there, and the heart is always on the left. So we actually want to flip it like this, and that means the heart goes onto the left. So now we can see how it's a reverse C-shape. Another clue in X-rays is they'll usually have written somewhere on them, on the left or the right. They'll either have one of these letters, left or right. And you make sure that you can read that, you make sure when you look at the X-ray that the left is on the left or the right is on the right. But when you're looking at it, you also then want to say, well, if that's the person's right, what would it look like if I'm looking at them from behind? So sometimes you actually have to turn the X-ray screen around. But the heart is a big clue, because the heart is always onto the left, and there'll be these little letters somewhere on the X-ray slide. Okay, So next we have a reverse S-shaped scoliosis. Now this is the most common type of curve. This is 80% of people have this type of curve. Now if you're reading the X-ray report, it might be called something like a thoracic dextroscoliosis and a lumbar lavoscoliosis. Lavo means left. So what we've got here is the dextro, which we mentioned earlier, the right, and then it goes down in the lumbar spine into a lavo. So dextroscoliosis of the thoracics, lavoscoliosis of the lumbars. And sometimes they like to throw in the word rotoscoliosis as well, and that just means rotation. So if you have a rib hump, you may have a rotothoracic scoliosis. So this is the most common one that you get in adolescent idiopathic scoliosis. So let's have a look at a few of these. This is how they look from behind. All these curves are relatively well balanced from the top and the bottom, so meaning that the angles are quite similar between the two curves. And in this case, we want to treat the two curves in a similar way. So we would use exercises for the top and the bottom. But sometimes the top curve is bigger and you do more exercises on that one, or sometimes the bottom curve is bigger and you do more exercises on that one. And we would call that the primary. If there was a bigger curve, we call it the primary curve. And that's the best curve to actually start with your exercise program. Okay, so this is what the Adams test would look like if you had a reverse S-shaped scoliosis. So you would bend forward and you notice a rib hump on your right side, and that right shoulder blade would be sticking out a little bit. There'd also be a thickening on your left lower back. Now there's no ribs in that left lower back, so it doesn't stick out quite like it does higher up, but it's similar. There's still a rotation in your vertebra. And you can see here in this slide, I actually use another way to describe it, a right thoracic, left lumbar. So that's another way to describe this type of scoliosis. Okay, so now we have the opposite of the two curves just discussed. This is a C-shaped scoliosis on the left and then an S-shaped scoliosis on the right. So let's have a look at this one. We call it a C-shape, left C-shape, or lavoscoliosis. And on the Adams test, you would bend forward and your rib hump will be on the left-hand side, like this. Now this one we would call a S-shaped scoliosis, because if you imagine, if you trace your finger along that spine, we're looking at someone from behind, don't forget, it would look like an S shape. We can also call it a left thoracic, right lumbar, or lavothoracic, dextrolumbar scoliosis. And then on the Adams test, it's going to look like this. You've got to have a rib hump on your left upper back, and then a thickening on your low right back. Okay, let me introduce you to a thing called a Scolimeter. So there's tons of these, you can just buy them on Amazon, super cheap. And what they do is they actually measure that rotation of the rib hump. So as you go through an exercise protocol, and if one of your goals is to reduce that rib hump, this is how you would record it. You would record it on day one. Every couple of months, you would then check, write down the numbers, and hopefully you would see a decrease in that angle. You can actually use them with your cell phone as well. So you download the app, put it in the special holder, and away you go. It's pretty simple to use. So in summary, we've got 4 main curves. They're 2 S-shaped curves, 2 C-shaped curves. X-rays tell you exactly what you're dealing with, but they sometimes come with a complicated report. And the report can be translated, as I have done through this little presentation here. Then we've got the Adams test, which can be done at home. You're looking for rib humps on the left or the right. And then we're going to use that information to deduce what type of curve you have. Then the Scolimeter is a great way of tracking the progress or the change of the curve as you go through exercises. And a lot of my clients, my older clients in particular, don't want multiple x-rays, so they're happy just tracking it with a Scolimeter.
Okay, so now you know what type of scoliosis you have, or at least you know how to find out what type of scoliosis you have. I'm hoping you'll be more confident to jump into some exercises specific for your curve. In my upcoming online scoliosis correction protocol exercise course, I'll be sharing a lot more strategies with you, such as how to increase mobility in a stiff spine, how to increase strength in a weak spine. This is my scoliosis mobility to stability formula. But I don't stop there. I want to show you how to increase endurance in a tired spine or a spine that's easily fatigued. So make sure you stay on the lookout, because the next few days I'll release more information about what's included so that you can know exactly what to look for. So if there's something you're interested in, make sure you click on the link under this video or somewhere on the screen and put your name on the early bird waitlist. Once you're on the early bird waitlist,
you'll get access to the protocol registration link the night before the protocol launches to the public. This means you have a greater chance of being accepted on the course. So make sure you place your name on the early bird waitlist. Just click the link, fill out the form, enter your name and email, and your spot will be reserved and you'll get early access to the program. Now, in my next video, I'm going to share with you a simple yet powerful exercise that can really set you up for success, that you can use to quickly slow down, stop, or even reverse the progress of your scoliosis. This is literally the #1 secret I've been using for years, and not many people who work with scoliosis do this. So stay tuned, because what I'm about to share with you in the next video is going to be your next step in successfully learning how to manage your spine for the rest of your life.